I think it's more of a colonial conversation.
Yeah, because like, and I like to say that like the reason they're living hunter-gatherer or in hunter-gatherer societies now is because like they're literally in a post-apocalyptic world because after their
That's right.
civilization was wiped out with smallpox,
That's right. That's right.
the society just
Some of them are
collapsed.
regressive. That's right.
Yeah, it's like
That's right.
just fascinating. But like, I think this is really interesting when we're talking about like Fermi paradox and things like this to see like how like different civilizations in different parts of the world just came up and like convergently evolved like features like writing and agriculture and things like that, and architecture too.
What, so what do you think about the same argument? People always bring aliens, for example, of Egypt, but also global tep. How do you pronounce that? Global tepe.
Gobekli Tepe.
Turkey is it's about 12,000 years old, so it's during the full glacial. So it's 14,000 years old during the full glacial, the younger dryas, approximately 9,000 years ago. You have an advanced city, advanced culture with buildings and cities and priesthood and so forth. Meanwhile, at that time, people were supposed to be out there hunting mastodons and mammoths, but in fact, we see the 30 city-states in southeast Turkey.
Well, from what I gather, it's actually not a city. It's more of just a monument, and people could have
more of a monument.
Yeah, and people like could have like been wandering around and within a localized area, so semi-nomadic, and then just being returned to that place and build a little bit at a time. So I don't think it was. Yeah, I don't necessarily think it was like a civilization. I mean, I think maybe people might have been farming around there at the time, so they could have been somewhat sedentary. I think farming probably first began in Syria. It was like what 12, 14,000 years ago. So I wouldn't rule out the idea that it could have spread to Turkey by then, but yeah, I don't think that the presence of Göbekli Tepe necessarily means there was a civilization as we understand it.
Still, it's striking to me that there's this advanced art technique and a way to manipulate large stones and so forth during a time where it was thought that humans, effectively worldwide, were fairly primitive nomadic hunters gatherers, but we see that that may not necessarily be the case. It might have been a much more diverse world than we thought.
Yeah,
culturally more rapid.
Well, if we just look at the archaeological record of the Paleolithic and the Pleistocene, we find very diverse cultures, like different kinds of arts, different kinds of textiles, all that kind of stuff. So they were sophisticated, but they just weren't sedentary.
So how do you bind the idea of early civilizations or early sophistication with the question earlier of alien intelligence on Earth, visiting Earth, and so forth? How would you wrap it in a nice tight bow if you could? What would you say?
What do you mean? Like, do I think that we've been visited early on?
Do you think it would necessitate? There was this advancement in terms of human behavior about 40,000 years ago in terms of advanced food use and so forth. We see that the evolution of human society was not linear, but it sort of jumps and starts in exponential growth. But then people pointing to alien intervention, do you find that to be a disservice to serious academic thought?
Oh yeah, for sure.
There might be okay.
Because like in evolutionary biology, there's this discourse between gradualism and punctuated equilibrium, but it's probably a mix of both. And I think it's the same thing with like human society. And sometimes advancements slowly build off each other. Other times they like hard times lead to innovation.
Right.
So it's a disservice.
So do you think innovation then probably flourishes with a degree of challenge, external challenge, to push the radical innovation, but not enough to actually collapse the stability of the party being innovative?
Maybe that would have been the case before we had the advent of writing and a good way to actually store information and really build on top of it, rapidly build on top of it, let alone the age of the internet. But I think that the whole innovation or challenges drive innovation thing is more so relevant in the Pleistocene then versus like post-civilization.
And so there was a meeting recently in Houston at the Lunar Planetary Institute with invited researchers from Ames Research Center, JPL, and then universities and so forth, to specifically discuss technosignatures and discuss where, if there were technosignatures, where we should be looking. And it was interesting because I read the invitation, I had to submit a request to attend, unfortunately, for some sort of conflict, I forgot what it was. But the idea was if there was any sort of previous civilizations on Earth, we'd be able to detect them. And this goes back to this concept of Silurian hypothesis. How would we see them? How would we know that they were there? And this discussion was interesting because we think that, we're the end-all, be-all culmination of evolution, and that our technologies and our buildings and so forth will outlast us. But in the reality of things, if the lights were to shut off tomorrow and we would disappear, most of the signature of humanity would be gone within a million years.
I don't.
With the exception of, go ahead, you disagree?
Yeah, I disagree because if say you dump an electronics dumpster, it gets buried over time. Eventually, the components are going to look nothing like computer chips or whatever. But if somebody found that, they noticed, whoa, there's like a really high concentration of all these different rare earth minerals that just no way they could have formed naturally or erode. Right. It can be it can get buried, but eventually, parts of it are going to get fossilized, and then you're going to see this long zigzagging thing that couldn't have been formed by a screen. So I think there would be remnants that we could detect of ancient civilizations. So I don't really buy into the Silurian hypothesis.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. Yeah, I agree. And sort of metal excursions of metal concentrations, redox conditions that shouldn't be there, anomalous isotopes that shouldn't be in association with one another. From that standpoint, then you look at like Avi Loeb's work. He recovered these micrometeorites from the Indian Ocean floor near Papua New Guinea, claiming that it was an extraterrestrial object that had burnt up in the atmosphere, and that he had recovered these small iron-dominated globules that he's seeing are probably the pieces of a melted extraterrestrial craft. And I'm going to be honest, to me, that stretches credibility quite a bit.
Yeah.
I like Avi. He's a pretty cool guy. I'm glad he's out there speaking up. But I don't think that he has it down in terms of all the ways he could actually do that, right?
Yeah. Also, I think in space, though, things aren't going to corrode. Things aren't going to weather. Things are going to be much more recognizable when they fall to Earth.
What do you mean?
Like a probe can last in space for millions of years. A computer that you just dump somewhere on Earth, sure. I mean, if it gets buried, it might leave a recognizable signature of a bunch of metals that shouldn't be there together. But it's not going to be something that a person would just dig up and then know what to do with. They just find a blob of weird colored dirt.
Right.
But with stuff in space, there's no weathering processes, or extremely slow weathering processes from ion interactions, whatever. And I think we can actually recognize macroscopic structures.
Right. Well, I think that one of the problems is that also this claim that it's extraterrestrial is really out there, because we know, and it's been known for a long time, that there's loads of micrometeorites in the ocean floor, right? So if you go out to places in the Oligotrophic Ocean, there's not a high sedimentation rate. So if there's not a high sedimentation rate, we're going to capture micrometeorites in a higher concentration without them being diluted by plankton infall and sedimentation out there in the middle of the ocean basins. I think he has a long way to go to convince anybody that it's actually an evidence of extraterrestrial craft. At this point, I don't buy it.
Yeah, that kind of think it harkens back to what Mitch was talking about before we started recording, which is that there needs to be more data. It needs to be more solid. We shouldn't be taking fighter pilots' word for it. we should be asking them, like, can we see your radar, your IR recordings, or whatever kind of sensors you had on your plane before we should really launch congressional hearings into this stuff.
That's right. So you think that if at the end of the day, you know, we've met today and chatted, do you think that we're any closer to answering the question that we started with this conversation?
Are there aliens? Well, I think we all started by saying that we probably have never been visited, even though we think there's intelligent life out there. So in that sense, we're where we started off, but I think we've elaborated our position very well.
Okay. Well, my friend, it's wonderful seeing you and seeing the whole gang of the whole pack. I've got to run home to my work, and I just wanted to thank you for inviting us to meet with you today.
All right, no problem. Hope to do this again sometime.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Take care, Patrick. Take care, Internet World. We'll talk to you soon, okay?
All right, see ya.
All right, bye, buddy.
Wolfpack out.